Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today after yesterday's event. My name is Muhammad. I'm the executive director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center, and as always, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today. Again, thank you for joining us. As always, we're going to get a few things out of the way, so if you could please silence the cell phones to begin with. Also, we have one other event this week on Friday, so you can grab more information about it from the flyers on the front. And one last thing, if you could please support us in any way you can, whether it's through a donation or through awareness, just telling your friends about us, your family, that would be great for us, so thank you. Today we're happy to host and welcome back in the same year our distinguished speaker today, David Sheen, and he'll be giving a talk titled The Rise, Fall, and Rise of Israel's Biggest Racists. The far right is in ascendancy all over the globe and in Israel. Factions once excoriated as political pariahs for being too racist, even by Israeli standards, have been welcomed into the halls of power by the government itself. So why does Netanyahu's ruling Likud Party rehabilitate the most reactionary American-born rabbis and their local acolytes at the vanguard of Israel's eliminationist movement? How have their extensive efforts to turn all of Israel Palestine and territories beyond into a single racially pure religious state escaped the attention of the mainstream media for decades? This will be a scandalous report from inside Jewish Israeli society by local journalist and human rights defender David Sheen that will leave you demanding answers and action before it's too late. And David will today also talk about Alex Odeh, who's with ADC, and his murder and his killers. So David Sheen was born in Canada, and he now reports from the ground in Israel Palestine for outlets like Middle East Eye, The New Arab, and Electronic Intifada. His work focuses on racial tensions and religious extremism, and in recent years, he has lectured on these topics at dozens of U.S. universities and over half a dozen European parliaments. In 2017, the Irish human rights group Frontline Defenders recognized Sheen as a human rights defender for his reporting. You can see more of his work at his website, www.davidsheen.com. After the panel, we'll have our Q&A session, so again, please wait for the mic to come to you so that everybody can hear. And please join me in giving a very warm welcome to David Sheen.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Muhammad, for that warm introduction. It's great to be back here. It's my third time here. I wish I didn't have to come here again and again to tell you these things, but unfortunately, too few people are doing it, so it requires of me to come back and keep you informed of what's going on. And so today, we're going to be speaking about the movement of Meir Kahane and his legacy. But first, to give you a schema with which to understand Jewish political thought so that we can understand the community from whence the Kahanist movement sprang and how it changed the Jewish community. So for those people who do come from a Jewish background, you may be familiar with these images and these tropes. This is from the Passover Haggadah that we read at the Passover Seder. We have a tradition where we say there's 4 types of Jews. And so I've appropriated this or reappropriated, and I'm saying that this actually isn't just a part of our tradition, it's part of the here and now, that there are actually 4 camps in the Jewish community, 4 political camps, I say: reformist, opportunist, supremacist, and humanist. And I'll explain what I mean by that. To understand how each of these 4 camps positions itself, we just ask how they relate to the Jewish traditional texts, to the Torah, the Talmud. And so we ask, is the Torah holy? And we ask, is the Torah just? All right? And based on these answers, that's how these four camps break down. So first of all, entering the modern era, essentially the Jewish community is comprised of the supremacist camp, the traditional Orthodox Judaism, and they answer yes to both of these questions. They say, yes, the Torah is holy. It was written by God and passed down to et cetera, and yes, it is just. When the Torah says that the Jewish people are chosen by God, and so God is a real estate agent that bequeaths this sliver of territory to the Jewish people, his chosen people, that is just. Then, in the mid-19th century, we have Jewish people finally being able to just be citizens of the states that they live in, and so we have an explosion of in different political directions. And one of these movements at that time is the reformist movement to emerge. And the reformist movement, they answer differently. They say, yes, the Torah is holy, but no, it's not just. It's not correct the way it is. It's not ethical. It's not moral. We need to adjust it and amend it and tinker it. And this is Reform Judaism, or the reformist camp. Then we have the Opportunist Camp. That's what I call them. This is the classic Zionist position, where they say the opposite. They say, no, the Torah is not holy. Of course not. It was written by people and edited by different people in different periods of time. And these are just, it's part of our literary tradition, but it's not the word of any God. But yes, it is just when the Torah says to give the Jewish people the land of Israel. So in other words, no, there's no God, but yes, God gave us the land. And so that's the Opportunist camp. And then we have also the Humanist camp, the Jewish socialist movement, and they answer no to both of those questions. No, the Torah is not holy, it's just written by people, it's literature, and no, it's not just when it says Jews are the sole owners of this land, and et cetera, et cetera. So these are the four camps, in my mind, of Jewish political thought. Now, some of you are going to already get your backs up and say, come on, David, it's so obvious when you use these terms that you're inflecting your own bias in here. Humanist, supremacist. You expect me to take this at face value? Okay, legitimate. But what I would argue here is that, in fact, even if you were from a different political camp, you would still see the same four camps. You would still recognize the schema that I've illustrated here. So let's say you're from the reformist camp. You'd say, you would see yourself in the best possible terms. We are the stable ones. We provide stability to the community. The Zionists, they're hawkish, and the religious, they're old school, and the socialists, they're too far left. And so too, if you were a Zionist, you would say, oh, we are the heroic ones, But the reformists, they're spineless, and the religious, they're useful. They help us, advance our goal of acquiring more land. And of course, the leftists are traitors. And if you were from the religious camp, you would say, oh, those reformers, the Zionists are helpful. They help us build the Torah state we want to see. And in any case, the same four-camp schema still exists, regardless of where you position yourself politically. So I would argue that this is how we can possibly understand the Jewish community, and this is a building block that helps us delve deeper and analyze those political movements. Now, of course, I could use terms that with no valence to them, just liberal, nationalist, religious, and socialist, but of course, doesn't make a fancy acronym that's easy to remember, so we're just going to go with, I'm the one making the presentation, of course, so I'm going to use Rosh, which is the Hebrew word for head, and that's an acronym that helps me remember the four camps: reformist, opportunist, supremacist, and humanist. So these are the four camps in the Jewish community, and now we're talking about Meir Kahane. And Kahane essentially, on one hand, he grew up the son of a rabbi in New York City, so he grew up firmly in the religious camp, but at the same time, Zev Jabotinsky, the leader of revisionist Zionism, whenever he would come to New York City to speak, then he would stay at the home of the Kahanas. So he actually was influenced by both of these camps, both the religious and the nationalist camp. He both studied in yeshiva, studied Talmud, and then also would get arrested at Zionist protests in New York City, in this case protesting the arrival of the British foreign minister and against his policies in Palestine. So in any case, he, I would argue, fuses these two schools of thought and in a way creates a bastard version of them that's worse than each of them. Because, okay, both of them are right-wing ideologies, the nationalists and the religious, but they each have their own safety valves that prevent it from going, full-on. Like, for example, the nationalist camp. So, yes, they have the agenda of, acquiring more and more land and territory and dispossession, but they're still secular for the most part. So you can talk to them, you can have a conversation with them on the basis of logic. That's their safety valve. On the other hand, the religious, the ultra-Orthodox, their vision for the land of Israel is a totalitarian one. They envision a complete theocracy. There's no room for non-Jews there. But at the same time, they have their own safety valve in that traditionally the ultra-Orthodox have been pacifists. They don't actively try to bring the Torah state they want into existence. They say, oh no, it's min Allah, it's from God, God will come down and bring this into being, and we're not going to take an active role in that. So each of these communities, though right-wing, they had their safety valves, but when Kahana fuses the two, what he creates from it is, it doesn't have any of those safety valves. It's just pure extremism. Now, of course, as I said, the Jewish community is comprised of not just right-wing camps, but left-wing camps as well. And probably this is what the community looks like in the United States prior to the advent of Kahanism, a bell graph. But once we have the introduction of this fifth camp, the monarchist or messianic camp that Kahana introduces, he shifts the Overton window over, And so now the center of the Jewish community is firmly in the Zionist camp. So this is like the long-term effect of Kahanism on the US. But of course, once Kahana moves to Israel, he's dealing with a whole different population set. In Israel, of course, the largest by far camp is the nationalist camp, right? Of course, Israel is the nationalist project, and so most of the Jews who move there or who live there are of the nationalist vein. So this is what he's starting with. So once he gets there, of course, he's working on fertile ground. People already adopting right-wing ideologies, and this is what the Knesset looks like consistently year after year. You can see 120 seats, and they're dominated by the nationalist camp, and the second largest camp is the religious camp. So year after year, election after election, the same results. Of course, the parties' fortunes rise and fall, but if we look at them by camp, group them into camps, we see that consistently it's the opportunist camp that rules the country, and in the shotgun position is the supremacist camp. So Kahana comes on the scene, and just very, very briefly to explain his legacy, I will just read you quotes from the laws that the bills that he introduced into the Knesset, that he tabled there. So Kahana, starts putting out these posters, and of course I'll translate to Hebrew for your benefit. Jewesses, don't date Arabs or other Gentiles. And here's the language of the bill that he submitted. Jews and Jewesses are forbidden to marry non-Jews, whether in Israel or abroad. Partners in a mixed marriage which has already been performed will be compelled to separate immediately. Jews and Jewesses are forbidden to have full or partial sexual relations of any sort with non-Jews. The transgressor of this section shall be punished with 2 years' imprisonment. A non-Jew who seduces a Jew to have sexual relations shall be punished with 3 years' imprisonment. The claim that the non-Jew did not know that his partner was a Jew does not exempt him from punishment. And the Education Ministry will prepare curriculum for primary and secondary schools against intermarriage. So we can see on full display his ideology of separation, racial separation, okay? But of course that's not sufficient. So clearly Kahana is about separation, racial separation, okay? But it's not only racial separation he wants, he then goes on to explain his vision for Jews and non-Jews, and his manifesto, one of dozens of books he wrote, They Must Go. It doesn't leave a lot for subtlety here, pretty straight up about what he wants to see. And of course, in the bill that he submits to the Knesset, he describes in full his vision. Only a member of the Jewish people may be a citizen of the state. In other words, strip non-Jews of their citizenship. The National Insurance Institute, Social Security, only Jews will be able to benefit from its payments. There will be a commission established to investigate the various religions to determine which of them are idol worship. A non-Jew who wishes to dwell in the land of Israel will have to assume the status of resident alien. What does this mean? The government shall determine the maximal number of resident aliens who may be settled in the land of Israel. So first of all, we're only going to allow a few of you to stick around, and let's see if you make the cut. A resident alien may not live within the municipal boundaries of the city of Jerusalem. So ethnically cleanse the capital city altogether. A resident alien may not be appointed to any position of authority and will not be able to vote. So total disenfranchisement. Every resident alien will also assume the obligations of taxes and slavery as defined by Jewish law. And a commission shall determine the compensation to each non-Jew who prefers to voluntarily leave Israel. So we see the real goal here is to make their lives so bad that they inevitably, just give up and say, okay, fine, it's so harsh here, I'll leave my homeland and live elsewhere and emigrate. So, and of course, naturally, any violation by a resident alien of any one of his obligations, like slavery, will bring immediate expulsion from Israel. So this is Kahana's legislative legacy. Of course, that's in the parliament itself. Once he's on the street, preaching to his followers and riling up, people who come out to his street rallies, then it's straight up, I want to remove the Arabs from Israel because I do not want to kill them every week, quote. When I'm prime minister, no Arab will be hurt by Jewish terrorism because there won't be an Arab left in Israel. They'll bow to me, lick my feet, and I'll be merciful and will allow them to leave. Whoever does not leave will be slaughtered. Okay. So this is the aspiring genocide heir, Meir Kahana, and his legacy. At this point, and we're talking mid-80s, even by the ruling Likud standards, even by the right-wing standards, this is off-the-charts racist, beyond the pale. So we have Michael Eitan, a lawmaker for the ruling Likud Party at that time, coming up on the Knesset floor and saying, this man's ideas are Judeo-Nazism. And he made a point-by-point comparison, saying, this is what Kahana is proposing. These are the Nuremberg laws, point by point. Kahana proposed this, the Nuremberg laws say that. Kahana wants this to happen, this is what the Nuremberg laws did, point by point, showing how they're parallel. So at this point, when even the government of Israel is calling Kahana a Nazi, at this point, the Supreme Court approves this message and says, you're right. Someone who's this racist should be ineligible to run for parliament in our country. And so they made him ineligible to run. They ruled out his candidacy. This is in 1988, running up to those elections. That's 88. But now, here we are, 30 years later, and that same Supreme Court has now sanctioned the Kahanist party, has now given them a seal of approval, kosher stamp, and now the Jewish Power Party, which is the party of the successors of Meir Kahana, they have run for Israeli elections. They're back in the race. And of course, whether they get in or not is another story. There's all kinds of factors to consider. But as the party head, Itamar Ben-Gvir, says, it could be that we'll be in the next Knesset or that we won't be in the Knesset. That's one question. But when we move the whole system to the right, it's not just one MK, member of Knesset, it's the whole government that moves. This is how we have to understand their influence. Also, it's not even whether they get in or not get in. They're already in because their local Tel Aviv affiliate, who they've been cultivating and grooming for years, Mai Golan, who's led racist rallies on the streets of Tel Aviv to ethnically cleanse the country of African refugees for the last decade, staunch Kahanist, speaking at Kahana's memorial ceremonies, she has now been recruited by Netanyahu himself. First round draft pick, Mai Golan. Now Netanyahu made her member of Knesset for the ruling Likud party. So we have Kahanists in the Knesset for the Likud itself. This is the marriage of Likud and Kahana. This is how far gone we are. 30 years later, they're in. This is why I say that we're in Messiah mode. But sure, that's an indictment of the amount of impunity that Kahanists enjoy today in Israel. But I'd say perhaps the biggest example of how much power and impunity this movement has and has had for decades is evidenced by the story of this man. This is a screenshot from Israeli national television, Kan, just a few months ago. And in this documentary, this man was featured there. This is Baruch ben Yosef. And he was Kahana's right-hand man and is labeled as such in the video, attributed to him. And he talks about his early years in the movement. I'm going to run you through his history to understand the impunity that he's earned in Israel. So he talks, I was about 12 to 13 years old. I started going through the training, karate training, firearms training. This is what I believe he looked like then, already showing up with Kahana at his street rallies in New York City. And then he immigrates to Israel straight out of high school, takes on the name Baruch. At this point, it's the beginning of Israel's settlement movement. 1970, Israel just conquered the West Bank and other territories in 1967. Now, 1976, we see the first Jewish settlements in the West Bank. The settlement of Kedumim. And he is in the first group of settlers. He's literally one of the pioneers, the first people to arrive there when there's nothing. And soon afterwards, he actually leaves the settlement, saying, it had a leftist leaning to it. It wasn't right enough for me. And then he joins the army. And in the army, he serves in a commando unit called Sayeret Shaked. It's now defunct, but at that time, it was one of the more important commando units in the Israeli army. And now, he takes on Hebrew last name as well. He's now reinvented himself as Baruch ben Yosef. Baruch ben Yosef, out of the army, he moves down to Hebron, which is the hotbed of Kahanism, a settlement built outside the city of Hebron, the largest Palestinian population center in the West Bank. And he's part of the Kahanist movement that's taking over buildings in downtown Hebron and dispossessing Palestinians. They're really at the vanguard of the settlement movement. Now, when he was interviewed about these activities of dispossessing Palestinians in Hebron by a Village Voice reporter, he said, Irgun leader David Raziel planted a bomb in an Arab market in 1939, killing 15 or 20 Arabs. And do you know how many streets are named after Raziel in Israel? If it was all right for him, how come it's not all right for us to terrorize Palestinians? And of course, he was right. I mean, the newspapers at that time did record that bomb did occur and did kill 15, 20 Palestinians. And the man responsible, David Raziel, he actually is honored in Israel. There's a stamp of him. There's streets named after him, more than one in different locations. There's a whole school named after him. There's a whole settlement named after him. I mean, he was honored in death, and decades later, he's still being honored in Israel. So yes, Israel does honor its terrorists, and he has a point, I have to admit. Of course, at that time in the 80s, early 80s, it was a time when many followers of Kahana made their mark on the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, the Holy Esplanade, and marked it as a target in efforts to, in their own words, to remove the foreigners from the Temple Mount. That was, of course, foreigners meaning the local indigenous Palestinians. Now, this is the kicker. You see, when the right wing is in power, the Kahanists don't really need to advance their agenda. The government is doing it for them. But when the center right, or slightly to the left of Likud is in power, in this case, or rather, let me just say that when there is efforts to make peace, in this case, it was an effort by the Likud itself. When there are efforts to create peace on the ground between Israel and its neighbors, and Israelis and Palestinians. In this case, President Carter bridging together Begin, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Anwar Sadat, the President of Egypt, late 70s. At this point, that's when the Kahanists strike, because they realize that if they're going to stop this peace from occurring, they will need to, actually ignite war. How do they do that? According to Carmi Gilon, formerly the head of the Shabak, the Shin Bet, that's Israel's FBI, he says about Baruch ben Yosef, Kahana planned with Baruch ben Yosef to shoot an M72 Lao rocket at the Dome of the Rock. He hoped that in the wake of that, all the Muslim states would launch a war against Israel, the war of Gog and Magog. So, this is their target. They planned to blow it up. They plotted to blow it up. And of course, Kahana and Ben Yosef were not the only ones to try to do so. There were other Kahanists who attempted in the early 80s. There was Alan Goodman. He actually made it in with an army rifle, and he killed 2 Palestinians and injured a dozen more. Then there's Yoel Lerner, another American-born Kahanist. He plotted 3 times to take over the Temple Mount and turn the Dome of the Rock into a Jewish settlement. And then, of course, there's Israel Ariel, the chief rabbi of the modern-day Templar movement. And, Kahana was always pushing for, takeover of the Temple Mount, but at this point, he actually manages to make it into the Knesset in 1984 after many years of campaigning. And so now that he's firmly based in Israel, he sends his right-hand man, Baruch ben Yosef, back to America to take care of U.S. operations for the Jewish Defense League. And that's when Alex Odeh is assassinated in 1985. Now, very briefly about his story to understand who this man was. So Alex Odeh, he was born in a village north of Jerusalem in the West Bank, but at that time there were no universities accredited in the West Bank, so he did his BA in Cairo, and then from then on he moved to America and did his master's in California, and soon afterwards he was recruited by the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. And at that time, of course, he was one of the first recruits there, and his job was essentially to change the image of Arabs and Arab Americans in the minds of American citizens. At that time, just like today, there was a lot of anti-Arab racism, and the understanding of Arab people, the tropes about them were generally negative, whether it was in art or whether it was in cartoons or Hollywood movies. And so he had his work cut out for him. He tried to change the image of the Arab in the American mind. But they also, the ADC and Alex Odeh, they also represented the beginnings of Arab American political organization. Efforts for the first time really in American history to put out political demands and to work towards those. And so the ADC starts taking out full-page ads in major American newspapers like the Washington Post, saying, we shouldn't be spending billions of dollars and sending it off to Israel. We should be spending that money here at home, investing in our youth and in our senior citizens. So at this point, this ticks off the Jewish Defense League to no end, because they are now, for the first time, really challenging the dominance of the Zionist narrative on Capitol Hill. If up until now, the Zionist narrative on Israel Palestine held sway without, or nearly without contest, then now, there are those who are challenging that narrative. And so, Alex Odeh, at first he starts getting regular telephone calls harassing him, crank calls threatening him, people identifying themselves as Jewish Defense League leaders. And I found this phone number in their own records. But then they take it to the next level. And on October 11th, actually that very evening, Alex Odeh is supposed to speak at a synagogue because he was doing what we would call today intersectional work before they even had a name for it. But before he could get there, he walked into his office and a bomb exploded and took his life. Of course, the place was totaled, and it was horrific for his, for his family, for his community. But to the JDL, the leader of the JDL at the time, Irv Rubin, said, well, he got exactly what he deserved. That was his comment. Okay. But in the years that followed, the reporting by investigative journalist Robert Friedman, writing in the Village Voice and writing in LA Times, and then later writing a biography of Kahana, the false prophet, he details how Odeh was assassinated, talking about there was Robert Manning, in addition to Ben Yosef, there was Robert Manning and Keith Fuchs. The two of them joined him, and the three of them together with Baruch Ben Yosef, allegedly, according to all the FBI sources that I've spoken to, both former and current agents in charge of the operation, of the investigation into Alex Odeh's death, these were the three men. Now, as I said, starting already in the late 80s, there's reporting naming them, quote, that saying that, Manning and Fuchs and Ben Yosef were mentioned as the bombers while we were still in front of the bombed out building. California police official on the scene. So, of course, we're talking about ultra-violence against Palestinians and so-called enemies of the Jewish people from the JDL's perspective, but the truth is that they also would regularly attack Jews that didn't agree with them. This is them attacking a left-wing group in the U.S. in the 70s, a group called Brera, one of the first Jewish groups to call for a two-state solution. And so, they would assault them at their meetings. And of course, there were other instances of attacks on Jews and Jewish groups here. You may recall that at that time in the 1970s, there was an effort to isolate the Soviet Union. There was a Cold War, and Kahana himself had labeled the Soviet Union as an enemy. Why? Because they did not allow Jews to emigrate. It's too long of a story to get into in any detail, but the point is that they targeted Soviet institutions. They wanted everyone to BDS them, to boycott, divest, and sanction from them. And then if anyone broke the, crossed the picket line, then they would be targeted also for ultraviolence. So because Saul Hurok, who was an impresario, Jewish impresario, in fact, at that time, who made great efforts to kind of bring Russian cultural productions to the United States and the Bolshoi Ballet. And when he finally managed to do so, because of his efforts to do so, one day he's in his office and boom, explosion. The JDL targets them and explodes the place. Saul Hurok himself, of course, the place was gutted, and Hurok himself was injured, but there was also fatality. One of his secretaries was killed. This woman, Iris Konis, and she, it could have been anyone, but it turns out that she herself was Jewish. So the JDL also, has Jewish blood on their hands. But in addition to this, right, why I'm telling you all this story, this aside, this tangent about these Jewish targets of the JDL, because years later, the Israeli government is determining its extradition policy, right? It's writing its laws about who may or may not be extradited to other countries if they're in fact charged with crimes. And in the law itself, in the Knesset discussion, and of course all this is available from the Israeli Knesset website, right? So here in 1978, they're discussing the law, and the head of the Law, Justice, Constitution Committee at that time, David Glass, member of Knesset, he explains the reason for the language in the clauses of the law. And he actually says, recall the case of Zeller, whose extradition was requested by the U.S. over the accusation of murder. Jerome Zeller, one of the murderers of Iris Konis, who bombed Saul Hurok's offices and killed this Jewish secretary, okay? He eventually, yes, the U.S. did request his extradition. Do you think that Zeller would have received a just trial in the U.S.? Thou shalt not deliver unto his master a slave that is escaped. Quotes from the Bible. So what does this mean? That murderer, that JDL murderer, is the slave that has escaped his master. So we will, even though he is murdered, even a Jewish woman, we will not send him back to be tried for murder. We don't trust the Goyim to prosecute him. And so, in this way, the Israeli lawmakers openly, admittedly, barefacedly changed their extradition laws to protect murderers. political murderers, even murderers of Jewish people. So, if they protected the murderer of Iris Konis, you really think that they're going to allow the murder of Alex Saudeh to be extradited back to the U.S.? All this to say. So, at that time, talking about the Zeller case, Kenneth Walton, officer in charge, a special agent in charge for the FBI, said, we did our job, but what can we do if the State Department does not want to extradite? So really, some additional questions need to be asked of state, what their role was in all of this. But in any case, back to Baruch ben Yosef, because now he's fled back to Israel after the murder. And what's he been up to all these years? If you read the American reportage, it would seem that this guy has just disappeared. He's named as the alleged assassin, but he's believed to have fled to Israel. No one knows what happened to him. Wow. Well, we're going to find out now what happened to him. It's actually not that difficult to tell. I was able to do so from behind the keyboard. So here he is in 1992, so 7 years after the murder, and he's speaking to a group of like-minded individuals at a conference. He says that, first of all, at that time, he's actually quoted by the Jewish Telegraphic Agency in an article saying that he admitted that he is wanted by the FBI in the US for his involvement in the militant JDL during the 70s and 80s. So then at this conference at that time, he goes on to say, I've been very involved with the anti-extradition program, okay? Like, he's openly flaunting it. Imagine the impunity. He's not even embarrassed to talk about it. What anti-extradition program? We've been trying to fight the extradition of Manning, right? Because I said there were 3 murderers, allegedly. And so he says, we succeeded in getting almost every rabbi of the religious Zionist movement to sign a letter calling for the cessation of the extradition. He's actually organizing efforts to resist the extradition of his, so-called co-conspirator to the Auda murder. And he goes on to explain his vision for the state of Israel. Democracy is anti-Jewish, it's anti-Judaism, it's anti-Torah. Nowhere in the Torah does it mention anything about a democracy. The only real form of government by the Jewish people is some form of dictatorship, he says. Voiding democracy and any opportunity of the people to decide what kind of government we'll have. Of course, as I said, this is the vision of the Kahanist movement, to create a Torah state, a theocracy. And so he, openly espousing it. That's what he's been doing, okay? So now, at this point, if you can imagine this, he's not only talking, he's trying to put his plans into practice. He actually went on and got a law degree in Israel from Israeli law school. And then he starts suing, not only defending himself in court and not only defending fellow Kahanists in court, but also suing the government, suing different ministers, demanding more rights, trying to increase Jewish rights at the expense of Palestinian rights, to dispossess them on the Temple Mount. And he sues the Minister of Religious Affairs, he sues the Minister of the Interior, he sues the Minister of Defense, he sues 2 ministers of police, he sues 3 ministers of justice, and he sues 4 Israeli prime ministers. Where is he? No one knows where he is. He's in court, suing the government. The government doesn't know where he is? No idea? All right, and once again, I said, every time the Israeli government veers off its path and starts to make efforts towards creating some kind of fragile peace of Palestinians or other Arab states, and that's when the far right again attacks. And so when Clinton hosted Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat at the White House, and they sealed what they call the Oslo Accords, that's when Baruch ben Yosef comes back into action. He's quoted in the LA Times saying, they will run like dogs when the time comes, and we'd like to take revenge too. Revenge is a godly idea. Imagine this. He's being quoted openly in US publications. And of course, that revenge was carried out, so-called revenge. Here's Hebron and the Cave of the Patriarchs, or the Ibrahimi Mosque. It's holy to both Jews and Muslims. And a Kahanist walked in, and on the Friday of Ramadan in 1994, he murdered, gunned down 29 Palestinian men and boys in prayer, and over 100 wounded in this vicious attack. And the man who did it, who carried it out, was Baruch Goldstein, another American-born Kahanist, who ran for Knesset on Kahana's party. Okay, he was an open out and out Kahanists. This is the amount of influence that the Kahanists have on Israeli history. Now, at that point in 1994, after this, vicious massacre, even the Israeli government has no choice but to acknowledge that they are a terrorist group through and through. And so it declares it designates Kahanist political parties as officially terrorist groups and rounds up all the leadership, the top leadership of the Kahanist parties. So rounds them into jail. Now, such a step was not popular with everyone, right? So here, the ruling Likud party's Limor Livnat, member of Knesset, she goes into the Knesset and she demands an explanation from the government. How dare you do this? You're putting Jews in administrative detention? You put Baruch ben Yosef behind bars? How can you do this? This is undemocratic. You're not even, where's the habeas corpus? Of course, this is used against Palestinians left, right, and center. Palestinians are always on the regular being accused of terrorism and no evidence is, being offered. They just are thrown into the cell for 6 months at a time and no one's the wiser. But it's only against Palestinians. So in the super rare circumstance that they use it against Jewish terrorists, now the right wing is enraged. How dare you do this undemocratic step? Well, the Israeli police minister at the time responds to her in the Knesset. Of course, it's all this in the Knesset protocol. If you can read Hebrew, you can read it as well. And Moshe Shachar says, well, hold on a second. It was a Likud government that used administrative detention for the first time against Jewish Israeli citizens. It wasn't us. It was your party in 1980 against Rabbi Kahana, against Rabbi Baruch ben Yosef Green. Of course, here's the document so you can see both his names are used. So what does this mean? It means that this man, the alleged assassin of Alex Zodeh, holds the record in Israel. He's the record holder. By this definition, he's the number one Jewish terrorist in the history of the state because he has been in administrative detention more times than any other Jewish Israeli citizen. Twice, he was sentenced to 6 months in administrative detention. This is a policy used only for suspected terrorists. So, where is he? Baruch ben Yosef, no idea where he might be. He's in an Israeli jail. They know exactly where he is. He's the number one terrorist in the history of the state by this definition. Yet, we have no idea where he is? What a farce. So this is Baruch ben Yosef, that one and the same. And of course, in response, talking about that mass murder in Hebron, he said, our friend Baruch Goldstein cleaned out the cave of the patriarchs from the garbage there. That's his comment, no shocker. Then when another Kahanist wrote a book about Baruch Goldstein, the murderer, praising him, singing his praises. Then when he was charged for incitement, then of course the lawyer Baruch ben Yosef defends him in court, right? He's now the top Kahanist lawyer. Now, to understand what effect this mass murder had, you just need only look at pictures of the souk in Hebron, the marketplace there, right? This is before the massacre, and this is the exact same location afterwards. You can see it's now a ghost town. So they've achieved their goal. They've ethnically cleansed Palestinians from that part of the city. Of course, a couple years later, so that was 94, now we're going to 1997, December 97, Limor Livnat, that same Likud legislator, she's now cut her hair and she's now Minister of Communications in the Israeli government. And as such, she comes to the US, she comes right here to DC. And while she's in the country, she meets with Jonathan Pollard. Remember him? So if you don't follow, he was a Jewish American man who worked in U.S. naval intelligence, and then he was charged and convicted of spying on the U.S. for Israel. And sentenced to a long jail sentence. And now, of course, Limor Livnat, she's a champion of the rights of Jewish prisoners, we see. And so not only in Israel, but also here in America. And so now she's, making Pollard out to be a hero. But when she visits him, she brings him a letter from Netanyahu. And in the letter, he writes to Pollard saying, I sincerely hope that our continued efforts on your behalf will bear fruit. Okay. Now, I'm going to put that a pin. I'm going to put a pin in that Pollard-Netanyahu connection, and come back to it in a second. But this is December 97. So 3 weeks later, in January 98, Netanyahu himself comes here. And he's here for talks at that time. Clinton's in the White House and Netanyahu's in the Prime Minister's office in Israel. And so he comes here and he gives a press conference at the National Press Club in DC. And he's asked about the assassination of Alex Saudeh. And in response, he's like, well, what are you bugging me about this? We sent you the murderer. If I recall correctly, Robert Manning. We extradited him. Now, okay, there is some truth in this. Robert Manning is, till this day, sitting in a jail cell in the United States. Israel did extradite him back to the US for murder, but it wasn't for this murder. It wasn't for Alex Saudeh. It was for a different murder altogether, another murder that wasn't even connected to Kahana movement and, far-right Jewish politics. It was like a murder for hire. So it was a whole other murder that had nothing to do with Alex Saudeh. Yes, he's now sitting in jail for that murder, but what about the rest of them? The other two murderers, allegedly. Keith Fuchs, so the questioner, Sam Husseini, he asks Netanyahu, he prods him and pokes him and says, no, what about Keith Fuchs and Andy Green? The other two, they're apparently still in Kiryat Arba, and the Justice Department has not received full cooperation at all from the Israeli government on this matter. So what does Netanyahu have to say in response to these charges? And of course, you can watch this till this day on C-SPAN. The video is still up there. You can also go into the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs website and read the transcript. It's all there. Netanyahu's response is, I assure you that our policy is to cooperate fully with the murderers. Yeah. Now, okay, to be fair, right, he followed that up with boilerplate assurances that no, we treat all people equally, Jews, Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians, and we follow up on all murder cases. Okay, sure. So could this be just a slip of the tongue? Maybe he just mixed up his words. Fair enough, legitimate. We can't convict a man over just mixing up his words. But was it or wasn't it a Freudian slip? Could he have really been meaning something? And when trying to come to a decision of whether he meant what he said and said what he meant, one of the factors that we need to take into account is just 10 months after this. So this is January 98. In November 98, that same Jonathan Pollard is suing Netanyahu. Imagine that. He's not happy. He maybe got a letter from him, but his case hasn't advanced. He's still, sitting in a U.S. jail, and now he's suing Netanyahu, demanding that, he take responsibility for him. So Pollard sues Netanyahu in Israeli court. The court case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And who's Pollard's lawyer? Who does he choose to represent him? Yes, none other than Baruch ben Yosef, Andy Green, one and the same, alleged assassin of Alex Saudeh. And now Netanyahu's, I have no idea where Andy Green, no idea where Baruch ben Yosef is. I have no clue where the alleged assassin of, he's in court suing you. You're facing off with him in Israel's Supreme Court just 10 months later after you deny that you know anything about him. You're the Prime Minister of Israel. The Shin Bet reports directly to you. Any of these stories would have had to have come to you. It's obvious that, it would seem on the face of it that Netanyahu knows well what he has done and who's responsible, and he's now covering up for it after the fact. I asked Netanyahu for comment. He did not offer any comment, so we're still waiting. I'm happy to hear if he's got some explanation. So Baruch ben Yosef, he's now so brazen, right, that he's now actually giving quotes to Newsline, to PBS. PBS film crew comes to Israel, and they're documenting Israel's far right, and they film him speaking openly, in his own voice, calling for more war. What will bring redemption is war. But today we're going in exactly the opposite direction. If we can force the army to go back to being offensive, an army of revenge, then we'll be able to bring the final redemption in the only way possible, through war. War now. So, okay, we're now talking about the mid-2000s. And at that time, Netanyahu is now out of power. He's been replaced by Ariel Sharon. Now, I don't need to tell anyone in this room, Ariel Sharon, by no stretch of the imagination, would be considered any leftist, okay? This was the man who was defense minister during Israel's invasion he was the architect of Israel's invasion of Lebanon in the early 80s, and responsible for, at least according to the Israeli government, and many people would say, shares no small, had no small role in allowing the massacres at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. Many people hold him personally responsible for those tragedies. So he's not considered a leftist by any stretch. But, 25 years later, at this point, he's now prime minister. And the population of Palestinians is swiftly approaching the population, the number of Jews in the country. If you look at all the territories from the river to the sea, all of Mandate Palestine, there's almost equal number of Jews and Arabs. And he's worried that soon the Palestinians will outpace the Jews. So he figures better to just cut off the Gaza Strip. We lose 1.5 million Palestinians, remove them from the population lists. Okay, we lose some square kilometers there, but it's such a small segment, just a couple percentage of the landmass. And here we've managed to reduce our roles, and increase the Jewish majority. So, for these reasons, these demographic reasons, he withdraws Israel's army and its settlements from the Gaza Strip. Of course, at that time, Baruch ben Yosef is outraged. How dare you? Every time there's a leftward drift, right? How dare we? How dare the government of Israel do this? And so he actually, participates in, protests. Hang the traitors, Gaza for the Jews. This is all filmed. And at that time, Israel's police minister, Tzachi Hanegbi, admittedly, he's a bit worried, right? Because don't forget, these people have already, far-right Israelis have already assassinated the prime minister, right? In fact, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin took place exactly 5 years to the day after Kahana's assassination. So some people may surmise that it was timed, that it was a way of trying to complete this, to complete the circuit. Some would say, no, but in any case, there is a very real threat that far-right Israelis would try to assassinate Sharon for planning the withdrawal from Gaza. And so, when the far-rightists like Ben Yosef start saying, hang the traitors, the Israeli police minister is worried. And so Baruch ben Yosef he says something about it. He's like, we got to watch out for the far right and make sure, the prime minister is protected. And now this enrages ben Yosef. How dare you speak out against the Kahanist movements? How dare you criticize the far right and make us out to be the enemy? What are you thinking? Now, of course, he gets, the Kahana leadership together and they go to protest at Hanegbi's house in suburb of Jerusalem. How dare you speak out against us? Now, once they get to his house, Hanegbi just, oh, hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? Oh, yeah, Mazel Tov, I hear you just got engaged. Yeah, so what's up? What are y'all doing here? And it turns into a cookout. And they just sit down, start chilling, and, yo, what's up? I don't know. It turns into just this, they're just relaxing, And the reason why, of course, is because Tzachi Hanegbi himself was a Kahanist. Okay, back in the day, he was also a follower of Meir Kahana. Just at some point, he realized that it may be better for him to work under the established political channels of the ruling Likud Party, that he may, be more successful. And in fact, he was. He rose to the rank of minister multiple times. But in any case, so when they get outside his house, he's like, what are you getting mad at us for? We're basically your students. Telling Hanegbi, why are you getting mad at us? We're basically your students. Now, of course, this is quoted in the Israeli newspapers, and nothing happens. And so here's a photograph of them chilling outside his house, and here's Ben Yosef and Hanegbi. And of course, in the middle of them is Itamar Ben Gvir, the head of the Kahanist party today. Itamar Ben Gvir has recently become the head of the Kahanist party after he earned his law degree in 2012. And where do you think he did his articling, his stage, his apprenticeship? With Ben Yosef. There would be no head of the Kahanist party if there hadn't been a Ben Yosef to have a law office where he could article. So we're now looking at the second generation. And so this is the legacy. Now, of course, Netanyahu has welcomed them into the fold and embraced them and urged the other right-wing parties to unite with the Kahanists so that they can, ride on his coattails to victory. Eventually, Sharon did pull out the settlements from the Gaza Strip and the Israeli army from there. And at this point, the Kahanists are enraged. So Ben Yosef and the other Kahanist leadership, they go to Rosh Pinah, and there is like the ancient Jewish cemetery there, and they conduct a Kabbalistic curse, or mumbo-jumbo mystic ritual, in which they call upon, well, I'll say it in their own words, we read the Pulsa Denura prayer so God will take the murderous dictator who is murdering the Jewish nation, talking about the Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, calling for his death. We hope that God will take him from us. We called upon angels of terror. So this is the amount of impunity they have. They openly call for the death of the Prime Minister. Nothing happens, right? They're begging to be arrested. They're screaming from the hilltops, we want the Prime Minister to die. How more obvious can you be? Yet in America, no mention of it. Nothing in English. Okay, of course, Ariel Sharon did, a few months later, actually have a stroke, and it incapacitated him for the rest of his life. He died just a couple years ago, but at that time, once he falls into the stroke, into a coma, what happens? Baruch Ben Yosef, back in the media, saying, I take full responsibility for what happened. Our Pulsa Denira kicked in. His ancestors, Sharon's ancestors, lived until they were over 100 years old, but we got him with the Pulsa Denura. So openly celebrating the death of the Prime Minister, taking credit for it, and again, no idea where this guy is, right? Yeah, okay, sure, whatever you say. Baruch Ben Yosef, this is what he looks like today. And speaking about his vision for the country, summarizing his vision, saying there won't be courts, there won't be a Knesset, only a king, a Sanhedrin, and the temple. Calling for establishing a body to burn Christianity and Islam out of the country. Open calls for ethnic cleansing. You can go onto YouTube and read what this guy has to say and hear it in his own words. He's not embarrassed to say so openly. That's the amount of impunity he enjoys. Of course, he regularly goes back up to the Temple Mount, to the Haram al-Sharif. And until recently, this was all I really knew about Alex Sode's alleged assassins. But in recent days, I've actually managed to find out more about the other murderer, allegedly, Keith Fuchs. So Keith Fuchs, he's now reinvented himself as Israel Fuchs, and he regularly makes appearances on the Temple Mount, visiting, the Dome of the Rock. But in some ways, he's wrought even more damage on the Israeli body politic, because in recent years he actually got together with these four men, also affiliates of a local Kahanist front group, Komemiyut, incidentally one that has been donated to by U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman, so funded by Friedman, but also funded by Ken Abramovitz, who is the bagman of the Likud, is the head of Likud Israel, so that's Netanyahu's political party. So top fundraiser for Netanyahu's party is now funding Israel Fuchs, the alleged assassin of Alex Sode, funding the NGO that he's established to author legislation for the Israeli Knesset. And here he is in the Israeli Knesset, the alleged assassin of Alex Sode, Israel Fuchs, sitting in the Israeli Knesset committee where they discuss legislation. And this group has, in fact, succeeded in getting some of the legislation it's authored passed in Israel's Knesset. This is the legacy. Top lawyer and writing legislation for the country. Zero mention in the American media. And that's going to change very, very soon. I have an article coming out in a couple weeks in mainstream media here. And at that point, you'll be able to read about what I've told you in a lot more details. But I'm just going to say one last thing so you can understand how deep the rot goes. I'm sorry to have to say this, but I believe it's important that you know. So, when I was able to find this info on Keith Fuchs, I was also able to learn where he lives. His address was listed. Since he established this NGO, I was able to find his info in government files. And wouldn't you know it, this is his house. And this is the address. The street that he lives on, the only street so named in the entire country, is Hare Gofna. In Hebrew, hills of Jifna. Jifna, for those who don't necessarily know, that's a village in the West Bank where Alex Audet was born and raised. It could be a random coincidence, but it's pretty hard to believe that the one street just happened to be. I think it's far more likely that either he chose to move to this street or that he purposefully had the street renamed. I don't know yet, but I think it's quite likely that every day he walks out in the morning and looks at the street sign, he remembers his so-called accomplishment. To him, this is a notch on the belt. This is a trophy. This is the village of Jifna today, and where Alex Audet's legacy is remembered. And I hope that I can do it some justice and remember him. And I hope that in the days to come, many more people will know about that legacy and about the legacy of his alleged assassins who have never faced justice for their crime, and the legacy of those top Israeli politicians who defended them all these years and helped protect them and achieve their impunity. Thanks for coming out here today.
Thank you for your presentation today. As a member of the American press, what can we do to bring these stories to light more? I feel personally embarrassed that we do not take these things seriously enough, and we really allow ourselves to be silenced. So how can we be allies?
Thank you. In terms of this story, it was sitting there the whole time. It just required someone, who reads Hebrew and cared enough to look. So not everyone is able to read Hebrew, but, and I'd of course be happy if you and others would augment, the reach of these stories by tweeting it out or writing follow-up stories once it comes out. But, the problem is that people, first of all, as you well know, investigative journalism isn't really funded, right? So the problem is also, is there money to fund this? As a community, as people, we need to fund investigative journalists. So there will be people who take the time, because, let's face it, I worked on this for months and months. I wasn't getting paid to do so. It was a labor of love. And so, love, I saw an injustice that was crying to the heavens. I discovered it by accident. I was not looking for it, but once I realized it, I knew I had to bring it into light and do what had to be done to expose it. So, but we need as a community to fund investigative journalism. And of course, people who work in the industry have to shrug off the gaslighting that we're constantly being inundated with, the efforts to silence our voices and to silence questions, to be bullied into thinking that by merely opposing racism in Israel, therefore we are anti-Jewish racists, flipping the script. No, I'm not a Jew-hating Jew, I'm a racism-hating Jew. And if you aren't one, then you're the problem. And of course, but people aren't at that stage yet. And I am trying to do what little I can to remind people and wake them up to the reality that that this needs to be opposed, and people need to find the strength to stand up to the gaslighting. It's a much longer question of how we do that, but I think that's the direction to head in. Thanks. Any other questions?
American rabbis, are they familiar with the story that you have told us? And how do they reconcile their sense of Jewish values with this story?
Okay, so this was a modified version of my Messiah Mode lecture. In this lecture, in the modified version, I focused almost exclusively on the story of the assassination because, this is the community, the Arab American community that he sprung from. So I wanted to tell that story in a higher resolution and speak about Kahana only, in broad lines, but broad brushstrokes. But in my main lecture that I've given at a number of locations across the country, and I'll be giving at Emory University next week, I go, Alex Sauda's story is as a smaller component, and I go into great detail about the history of the Kahanist movement, spanning, from the 60s to the day of his death in 1990, so, and beyond. And so in that presentation, I do discuss that. Now, of course, that will be online eventually in a month or two, but in brief, to answer your question, on the face of it, most of the North American Jewish community or leadership of the community did hold him at arm's length and did say, oh, he's extremist, he's beyond the pale. But not everyone. Many people openly supported him. And of those that didn't, we find out after the fact that many of the mainstream Jewish leaders were actually playing good cop, bad cop. So, they would claim in public to dislike Kahana, but they would work with him behind the scenes to, be like, okay, with a threat of Kahana on the streets, they could make their demands. They could say, well, if you don't want Kahana to come into power, you should listen to what I have to say. And apparently, no small number of contributors, Jewish contributors, political contributors, actually, supposedly would, in public, distance themselves from him, but would actually fund him behind the scenes. The group that most especially was instrumental in facilitating that funding was Chabad. No shocker there, but Chabad rabbis and Chabad synagogues often served as like way stations for people to transfer money to Kahana. Even the Aronei Kodesh, the vessels that held the Torah scrolls in these synagogues, were reportedly used to to be drops, so that people who wanted to fund Kahana would leave money there, and then a Kahana representative would come and pick up money from there. This is according to reporting by Friedman and others. So the point is, there is a level of complicity that never was answered for. And of course, today, there's no limit to the amount of gross racism coming out of Israel that American mainstream leadership does not decry, and I can go on and on about that for hours and hours. We need to see the American Jewish leadership spit out these elements from it, but they don't. These are the rabbis that hold sway in the parliament, and I'm sad to say this is the situation. That's why, thankfully, there's a few young Jews in groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now, and they're starting to protest their own community leadership, protesting the ADL and protesting Federation, and demanding that the community withdraw from these kinds of, from supporting these kinds of activities and these kinds of projects. But this is just the beginning. The leadership of the Jewish community is squarely behind. Hell, it gets worse than that. In San Francisco, it turns out that the leadership of the Jewish Community of Federation is actually funding those McCarthyist groups, those groups that are making lists of good Jews and bad Jews in order to target them, to try to get them expelled from their places of work, and to prevent them from being able to build resumes and have careers. So the Jewish communities are actually funding these smear campaigns against their own young Jewish children. So and this is in San Francisco. We can say that's the most liberal, perhaps, of all the Jewish communities. So certainly all the other Jewish communities in North America, or the leadership of them, are staunchly in the far right, or in the right-wing camp, and waging war against those few leftist Jews who would challenge the dominance of the right-wing narrative and support for right-wing Zionism. The thing is that I report in English for the most part. So most Jewish Israelis read their news in Hebrew. So most Jewish Israelis have no idea that I even exist, for the most part.
I thought you were one of their own.
Look, I get lots of trolls, but most of them are like behind keyboards. They don't come out to my house. They don't interact with me on a physical basis. So, of course, if I'm covering a rally, a right-wing rally, I'm liable to, come under attack. I have to be worried about my own physical safety. But for the most part, the way that I am targeted is economically. The Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs wages a war against whistleblowers, and so I'm one of them. And they're working with the neocon think tank called, many, but including the Fellowship for the Defense of Democracies, and they have agents who smear agents and smear merchants who craft campaigns to try to make me out to be an anti-Jewish racist. Of course, the only way that they can do this is by not quoting one single word that I say. They can only allege things about me and in their opinions describe what they say I am, but they can never point to any fact. They can never link to any article or any video or any statement I've ever made, because there are none. Because I'm not an anti-Jewish racist, I'm an anti-racist, and so but it works. Those campaigns do meet with success. Not always, but often, just trying to get an article published, these outlets have to worry, even if they themselves don't believe these smears, they have to wonder, if I publish this article, then am I going to get attacked for being allegedly an anti-Jewish racist? So they just prefer not to go there altogether and get someone else to write the article. So yeah, just making enough money to pay the rent, that's the biggest challenge. That's the economic war that they wage on me. My own tax money is paying for this, right? Mine too. Yours too, yeah.
Have there been any serious efforts by anyone in the Congress, in the U.S. government, law enforcement, Arab American community, or anybody else in the Jewish community to pursue this issue?
Which issues specifically do you mean?
Well, the terrorism issue that we've heard about a lot concerning other terrorists.
Right. There haven't, to my knowledge, specifically about Alex Sauda. Sure, his family and his community and the organization he worked for, they'd like to see justice done, but the Israeli government has been completely opaque and it isn't willing to be helpful in this regard, and so there's no breakthroughs on it up until now. In terms of terrorism as a whole, Jewish terrorism as a whole, I think that clearly there are some efforts to stop it, but obviously there isn't a real effort to stop it because there's regular attacks. Those attacks today mainly consist of arson attacks, burning down a church, burning down cars, burning down a mosque, burning a school where Jews and Arabs study together, or their graffiti attacks, we're going to kill you, we're going to kick you out, and blah, 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 blah. We see this often happening on Jewish holidays, sad to say. That's seemingly when there are spikes of racist attacks. So these attacks proliferate across the country. Now, you have groups like the Anti-Defamation League who chronicle every single anti-Semitic incident and many incidents that aren't anti-Semitic, but they label as anti-Semitic, and they tabulate these and they say, okay, this is the anti-Semitism quotient, and this is the number of and the percentage of anti-Semitic attacks. But when you compare that to Israel, according to my statistical analysis, the amount of anti-Gentile or just anti-Palestinian attacks are like 20 times the level of attacks on Jews. And that's only the physical attacks. Unlike the ADL, I'm not counting just like racism that people encounter in every aspect of their lives, and non-violent racist attacks. I'm talking about straight up physical racist attacks, 20 times what the total sum of anti-Semitic attacks in the U.S. I mean, proportionately, not to minimize in any way anti-Jewish attacks in the white supremacy and anti-Semitism in this country, which is clearly rising and at lethal levels, right? That should not be minimized, but the amount of anti-Arab racism in Israel surpasses it exponentially. So the fact that it's allowed to go on is because it's supported at political levels. And until there's some kind of countervailing force in Israeli society or from outside Israeli society, they will continue to have, for the most part, impunity.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Okay.
Thank you very much. You said Alex Ode was born in Jerusalem.
Jifna.
Oh, Jifna, not
Jifna, north of Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. So is it in east? Is it on the West Bank?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this sculpture, is that of him?
Yes, sorry, I did not say. This sculpture is a sculpture of Alex Ode, and it was, this is in Santa Ana, California,
Oh, California.
where he lived and worked.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. The local library, so this was several years after his death that they
And
tribute
was
to
he
him.
a Muslim or Christian?
He was Christian.
Christian.
He comes from a Christian family.
Right, because I see the cross, saw the
Mhm.
crosses on the
On
village.
that memorial, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, thank you again so much.
Mm.
We appreciate it. Thank you.